The rain fell in slow, heavy sheets over the quiet suburban streets of Riverbend, Illinois, a place where nothing terrible was supposed to happen. Streetlights flickered through the fall, casting pale halos on wet asphalt. It was a night like any other, except for the twisted wreck at the end of Willow Creek Road. A luxury sedan crumpled against a tree, steam rising from its hood like a dying breath. Inside were two people, a husband and wife, still silent and seemingly lifeless. The responding officers described the scene as an accident. Slick roads, late night, and a sharp curve known for taking careless drivers by surprise. But one detective couldn't shake a feeling that something didn't fit. The airbags had deployed, yes. The crash marks made sense. Yet there was a strange calm about the wreck. No skid marks, no panic. And when the first coroner's report came in, that feeling of unease began to bloom into suspicion. Because neither victim had injuries consistent with a crash. They were dead before the car ever hit the tree. The couple, Martin and Diane Calloway, were known in Riverbend as quiet, generous people, owners of a small but successful logistics company. They'd been married 30 years, the kind of union that friends described as unshakable. Their only son, Aaron, was a local success story, handsome, driven, a finance consultant who'd recently moved back into town after years in Los Angeles. But behind the smiles, behind the family photos displayed at every church fundraiser, something was festering, a secret that would soon unravel everything they thought they built. Before we go deeper into this chilling case, take a moment to think about the people closest to you, the ones you'd trust with your life, because sometimes trust is the first thing that gets betrayed. If stories like this keep you thinking long after they end, make sure to follow and stay with us as we uncover what was hidden, because what you're about to hear was buried beneath lies for far too long. When Aaron Calloway appeared at the police station that morning, drenched and shaking, he played the role of a grieving son with perfect precision. Witnesses remember his voice cracking as he said, "I told them not to drive at night." He wept, asked for a moment alone, and thanked the officers for their efforts. The kind of composure only heartbreak could explain, or the kind of performance that hides guilt. The funeral came quickly. It was held at St. Mary's, a church where the Calloways had been members for decades. Rows of mourners in black, soft organ music, and Aaron at the front row, head bowed, hands clasped tight. Yet one thing struck those who attended. There were no tears, no trembling, just a stillness in his posture, like someone waiting for something to be over. In the days that followed, the insurance paperwork began to surface. Martin and Diane's joint life insurance policy had been updated only 6 months earlier, increasing its value from $2 million to a staggering $6.7 million. And the sole beneficiary? Their son, Aaron. Neighbors whispered about it quietly at first. Some said it was understandable. He was their only child. Others wondered why such a drastic change was made so suddenly, especially when the family's company had started struggling financially. The business's accounts showed irregular transfers, payments to unknown entities, and mounting debt. Diane's sister, Linda, began to suspect something more sinister. She told investigators later, Martin mentioned they were planning to restructure the business, that Aaron wanted control, but Diane, she didn't trust him with the money. Investigators started piecing together fragments of a timeline. 6 months before the crash, Aaron had moved back to Riverbend after losing his high-paying job in Los Angeles. Officially, it was to help with the family business. Unofficially, it was desperation. He was drowning in debt, personal loans, failed investments, even rumors of gambling losses. What started as an effort to save his parents' legacy soon turned into an obsession with reclaiming control over their wealth. But it wasn't just greed, it was pride. For years, Aaron had lived under the weight of his parents' success, the shadow of two self-made entrepreneurs who expected perfection. He wanted to prove himself, to outshine them. And when that chance slipped away, something inside him broke. Detective Michael Torres, one of the lead investigators, later recalled, Aaron was intelligent, too intelligent. He knew how to speak, how to act. But there was something rehearsed about his grief, something mechanical. It wasn't until the crash reconstruction report came in that the facade began to crumble. The car's onboard computer data showed that the vehicle had been idle for over 2 hours before impact. The accelerator was never pressed. The crash was staged. Suddenly, everything shifted. What looked like tragedy began to reek of calculation. Aaron's alibi, that he was home working on company files, fell apart when surveillance footage placed his car near the accident site an hour before the supposed time of death. The discovery of a gas canister and accelerant traces inside the garage raised even darker questions. Had the crash been just one part of a larger plan? A week later, investigators executed a search warrant on Aaron's home. What they found would expose everything. Inside his desk drawer were drafts of emails, unsent messages to his insurance agent, phrased as if from his father's account. Each message tried to clarify beneficiary updates and verify policy amounts. The handwriting analysis confirmed what they feared. Aaron had been impersonating his father. And then came the most chilling detail. A recorded note from Martin's phone, made just 3 days before the crash. His voice was tired, quiet, as he said, "If anything happens to us, look at Aaron. I hope I'm wrong, but something feels off." When that message surfaced, it changed the case forever. But even with motive, suspicion, and fragments of deceit, the police still needed proof. And Aaron, confident in his plan, started to get comfortable again. He began showing up to the family company's office, talking about future expansions, and even hinting that he might sell the property to move on. He didn't know that detectives were already watching. An undercover financial audit revealed unauthorized withdrawals totaling nearly $300,000, money taken after the crash, before the insurance payout was even approved. It was the arrogance of a man who believed the world had finally bent to his will. Detective Torres described it best. He acted like someone who thought he'd already won. But arrogance has a way of betraying itself. The night before the official insurance check was due to clear, Aaron made a call, one he thought no one would trace. He contacted a private broker in Nevada asking about offshore accounts and safe ways to move large inheritances. The broker, already cooperating in an unrelated fraud case, recorded the call. When the FBI joined the investigation, the pieces locked into place: bank statements, forged emails, GPS data, the staged crash, the falsified signatures. It was all there. Still, the story wasn't as simple as greed. In interviews with those who knew Aaron, a darker narrative emerged, one rooted in resentment. He'd grown up under intense pressure, the golden child who could do no wrong. Every mistake was magnified, every failure punished. Friends recalled how he'd talk about starting over without his parents' constant judgment. One said he loved them, sure, but he also hated feeling owned by them. The prosecution would later call it a love warped by entitlement. But before the trial, before the public would hear the truth, there was one final twist waiting to be exposed. It began with a simple observation from a forensic technician reviewing Martin's car data again, a discrepancy in the time logs. The onboard computer showed ignition activity that didn't match Aaron's version of events. There was a missing hour, an hour that would reveal just how far he'd gone to perfect the illusion. And when they found the evidence hidden in his apartment's crawl space, a set of car keys, his father's phone, and a burner device used to spoof calls, the final layer of deception peeled away. Aaron hadn't just staged the crash. He had staged grief itself. He had built his parents' deaths like a performance, rehearsed down to the smallest detail, knowing that in a town that worshipped appearances, no one would ever question a son mourning his mother and father. But Riverbend was about to see what happens when the truth is exposed. The discovery of the burner device changed the direction of the entire investigation. It meant Aaron hadn't acted impulsively or in panic. He had planned every element, from the forged emails to the carefully timed phone calls that placed him miles away when the stage crash occurred. He had crafted an image of innocence, wearing grief like a tailored suit. But suits unravel. And this one began to tear apart thread by thread. Detectives replayed the recordings found on the burner device, test calls he made to himself, practicing tone and urgency. The audio logs captured him repeating lines over and over. "I just want them safe. I told them not to go out tonight. Why weren't they home?" His voice calm at first, then shaky, forced, deliberate. It was the sound of a man refining his performance, molding it into something he believed others would accept without question. In the quiet of the interrogation room, Detective Torres reviewed the evidence and prepared for the moment Aaron would walk in. What they had now wasn't just motive or suspicion. It was a blueprint of deceit. But Torres wanted something more. The truth in Aaron's own words. He wanted to hear how a son could rationalize what he had done. When Aaron entered the room that morning, he carried himself with the same controlled composure he had shown since the crash. He sat down, folded his hands, and asked softly, "Is this about my parents' case?" I already told you everything. Torres didn't respond immediately. He placed a small evidence bag on the table, the burner device. Aaron's eyes twitched just slightly, the first crack in his mask. We found this, Torres said. It tells a very different story from the one you've been giving us. Aaron's jaw tightened. I don't know what that is. But he did, and he knew they knew. As the minutes passed, investigators laid out the growing mountain of evidence: the forged signatures, the gas canister, the insurance documents, the missing eyewitness footage, the falsified call logs, the offshore account inquiries, and the damning truth buried inside Martin's final voice recording. Yet even cornered, Aaron refused to confess. Instead, he leaned back and said quietly, "You think you understand what happened, but you don't know them. You don't know what they did to me." It was a shift, sudden, sharp, and unnerving. He began painting a picture of a childhood filled with pressure, judgment, and emotional suffocation. He described expectations that weighed like chains, sacrifices that were never acknowledged, and dreams crushed under the burden of his parents' ambition. To him, it wasn't murder, it was liberation. But prosecutors weren't interested in his reinterpretation of suffering. They needed facts, and the facts were overwhelming. The forensic report revealed that both parents were drugged with a sedative the night they died, one commonly prescribed for anxiety. Their blood work showed doses far higher than anything medically acceptable. They never saw the crash. They never felt the impact. Their son made sure of that. The investigation reached the point where there was no ambiguity left. The district attorney's office filed charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, forgery, and tampering with evidence. The public reaction in Riverbend was immediate and explosive. Neighbors who once greeted the Calloway family with warm smiles now spoke in hushed tones, unable to reconcile the polite young man they knew with the allegations against him. Community forums filled with speculation, anger, disbelief. One resident said, "I watched him grow up. He was always polite, always respectful. I just can't believe he'd do something like this." But belief had little place in this case. What mattered were the details, and those details were merciless. As the trial date approached, reporters camped outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed. Commentators dissected every update. The narrative of a devoted son had shifted into that of a meticulous killer driven by greed and resentment. And yet, despite the evidence, Aaron remained calm. In pretrial hearings, he sat still, blinking occasionally, showing no emotion as his parents' final moments were described in painstaking detail. The prosecution's opening statement was simple. This was not an accident. This was a calculated elimination of obstacles standing between a man and a life of financial freedom. They presented the staged crash, the sedatives, the insurance policy increase, the forged emails, and the offshore financial inquiries. They brought experts to the stand: crash reconstructionists, forensic psychologists, handwriting analysts. They played Martin's final recording. The courtroom fell silent as his voice echoed through the speakers, trembling with fear he tried to conceal. "If anything happens to us, look at Aaron." Those words alone shattered any remaining illusion of doubt. The defense painted a different picture. They claimed the Calloways had emotionally abused their son, pushed him beyond reasonable limits, denied him autonomy, and used financial control as a weapon. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the sedatives could have been taken voluntarily, that the crash data could have been corrupted, that the forged emails had no witness tying them directly to Aaron. But jurors saw through it. They watched him closely, his stillness, his calculation, his unwavering confidence. It wasn't the look of a man grieving. It was the look of a man convinced of his own superiority. The turning point came when prosecutors introduced the hidden recording from the burner device. Hearing Aaron rehearse his lines meant to evoke sympathy and innocence, left jurors visibly shaken. The mask had been torn away. After 29 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. Aaron stood as the verdict was read. Guilty on every count. No emotion, no reaction, just a slight nod, as if he had always known the outcome. The sentencing phase was brief. The judge spoke with a measured voice, acknowledging the devastating loss suffered by the community, the family, and even by Aaron himself, a man who had abandoned every trace of humanity for the sake of wealth. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Reporters noted that as he was led away, Aaron glanced briefly toward the gallery. Not at the few remaining relatives, not at the journalists, but at the empty seats where his parents once sat during his school events, his graduations, his milestones. The irony was crushing. He had wanted control, freedom, identity. Instead, he was left with nothing but concrete walls and the memory of what he destroyed. In the aftermath, the Callaway business shuttered. Their home was sold. The church held a memorial service described as the closing of a tragic chapter. Riverbend, once peaceful and predictable, carried a shadow that would linger for years. Parents held their children closer. Friends paid attention to signs they once ignored. The case became a cautionary tale whispered in schools, workplaces, and family gatherings. Did you hear about the Callaways? Their own son. But beneath the tragedy was a deeper question, one that haunted investigators long after the case closed. How does love turn into something so twisted? How does expectation transform into entitlement? How does a child raised with every opportunity come to see the people who loved him most as obstacles to be removed? Detective Torres reflected on this during an interview years later. You think you understand human nature? Then you meet someone like Aaron. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't insane. He was ordinary. And that's what makes it terrifying. The Callaway case forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. The darkest betrayals often come from the people we trust without question. The danger isn't always in strangers lurking in shadows. Sometimes it's sitting at the family dinner table, smiling across the candlelight. And as the story faded from headlines, one quiet reality remained. No amount of money, not 6.7 million, not anything, could ever justify what was lost. Martin and Diane were more than a payout. They were parents who believed in their son, even when he gave them reasons not to. They were people who rebuilt their lives from nothing, only to have everything taken by someone they loved unconditionally. In the end, justice prevailed in the courtroom, but healing never truly came. Riverbend learned to move forward, but the gap left behind remained a scar, a reminder that silence, pressure, and hidden resentments can grow into something deadly when left unchecked. And so the Callaway case stands as a warning, a reflection, a mirror held to every family that hides its conflicts behind closed doors, believing time alone will fix what is broken. Because sometimes the truth isn't discovered until it's far too late. And when it finally surfaces, when it is exposed, the damage is already irreversible. If this story leaves you questioning the nature of trust and the weight of family expectations, stay with us. There are more untold truths waiting, stories that show how fragile loyalty can be, and how quickly love can transform into betrayal when no one is paying attention. Do you think justice was truly served? Or are there still secrets left buried? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you want us to continue exposing the world's darkest family secrets and betrayals, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story we bring to light.